If you've been playing GITCG recently, I'm sure you've encountered these decks. Drawing their entire deck by round 2 and getting upwards of 20 dice? How is that fair? Well, allow me to introduce you to Hypermagic. Disclaimer, this information is relevant up to 4.4, but due to the dominance of this deck in CN tournaments, there is a non-zero chance that this deck gets nerfed. I will update the description of this video if there's any changes from future patches, and how that would affect Hypermagic as a whole. I also want to credit Kei from the CN community, since most of the information from this video is taken from his video on Bilibili. So if you understand Chinese, please do check out his video as he goes into a lot more detail about the current metagame. But before we get into Hypermagic, I want to talk about the Magic Engine first. An engine, or package, is a collection of cards that synergize well together, and you include them in your deck to help improve consistency. The key cards of the Magic Engine include Yayoi Nanatsuki, Gilded Dreams, Lyre Song, and War Princess. Of course, you should run more artifacts in this engine to help Yayoi discount Gilded Dreams, but these are the core cards for now. The term magic originated from the CN term MATSU, which means to make magic, as you generate dice out of thin air. Keep in mind that this only works for rainbow decks, since you need 3 characters of different elements for Gilded Dreams to generate 1 Omni Dice and 1 Align Dice. If you need details on how each card works, you can watch my previous video on Mew where I go into detail about each action cards. But to keep things brief, how you would play the Magic Engine is to equip cheap draw artifacts like Kavarina, Flowing Rings, or Shadow of the Sand King, then play Yayoi so she can discount Gilded Dreams and generate you free dice. Then hopefully at this point you've drawn into your Lyre Songs and you can unequip Gilded Dreams to re-equip it and generate 1 dice, basically acting as a woven. Then when you're done using your Lyre Songs and you're ready to close out the game, you play War Princess and replace your existing artifact with Gamblers to go for the kill. Next we will talk about Jeht Engine. Not that Jeht Engine. So, the key cards for Jeht Engine include Jeht, obviously, Sunyata Flower, Dunyazart, and self-discarding supports like Lieben, Chang, Sealy, Seedbox, and even Mameri if you're brave enough. The initial reception to Jeht is that she is very inconsistent, needing a lot of preparation before getting to activate. The thing with Jeht is that your deck needs to be built specifically with her card in mind, so you have to sacrifice other engine cards just so she can get the discard she needs to activate. Not to mention that she only activates when you burst. So the general consensus was that you needed to play a resonance deck that have smaller engines and characters with low cost bursts, so you can fill in as much support as possible for Jeht and trigger her effects consistently. And now we are ready to talk about Hypermagic. Once players started experimenting and combining 2 of the best engines in this game, this is the result. The highlighted cards are magic while the rest are related to Jeht. This deck has little to no deck space, cutting even the most played card of Lotus Flower Crypts, and running at least 15 cards for draw effects, ensuring you cycle through 2/3 of your deck by the end of round 2. I'm sure you've noticed by now that I didn't include any character cards in this deck. That's because the core of this deck are the action cards themselves, and you can slot in different characters to fill in the main roles for a Hypermagic deck. First we have the starter. These characters will perform the most actions during the early game. Their main objective is to draw cards, burst to support teammates or proc Jeht early, and resist early game pressure. The commonly used characters are Linny, who can proc Chang, Kavarina, Flowing Rings on his own to draw cards, Yelan, who has built-in draw power in her kit, Xingqiu, who has a low-cost burst, self-cleanses, and procs Chang reliably, Bennett, who has a low-energy burst, and if you manage to proc Jeht during your combo round, you don't even need his talent card, and Candace, who has a low-cost burst, a prepare skill to tank hits, and potentially force your opponents to end round earlier so you get more actions. Again, these characters are only suggestions, so feel free to experiment. Next we have the Extender. These characters support the starter character offensively or defensively. Their main objective is to soak up damage, draw more cards, provide team support, or deal chip damage to soften up the opposing team. The commonly used characters are Seahorse, who has built-in draw power if you end on him, and his armor lets you tank summon damage, Yelan, who also fills this role since you can bring her in to draw cards, Chongyun, who provides Cryo Infusion with his E and lets your team freeze the opponent during your combo round, Layla, who acts as a free support and damage soak using her E. Although slower, she can occasionally apply Cryo, which can prove annoying for your opponents to play around, and Cryocube, who can freeze with Xingqiu's Rage Swords, chip your opponents early and proc Jeht reliably with its low cost burst. Lastly, we have the Anchor. These characters have one job, and one job only, to deal as much damage as possible and end the game with all the dice advantage gained from Magic and Jeht. Traditionally, the term Anchor is used for characters with high single target damage and decent survivability, but here we throw that all out the window, because the only thing you need is just damage. The commonly used characters are Child, who is the most aggressive single target damage dealer, Agedaha, who has built-in dice generation and decent burst damage, Razor, who is one of the best OTK units thanks to his burst hitting twice, which bypasses Lotus, and basically acts as a one-man Bennett, Eula, who has a high base damage with Grimheart, and her burst synergizing really well with Jeht. So here is a quick summary of all the character roles. And here I've included some sample character lists that I've got from other TCG channels. I've linked their videos down in the description below, so feel free to check them out to see how these decks are played. And now we move on to the general game plan for Hypermagic. First off, during your mulligan phase, you want to throw away everything including your Arcane Legend. The only cards you want in your starting hand is Card Draw, and maybe Dunya's Art. Start with your starter and draw as many cards as you can before bursting. If you drew badly, just go for ramp. Next, depending on your board situation, you either swap to your extender to tank hits and draw cards, or you burst with your starter and sack them off. At this point, you should be rearranging your support zone in preparation for Jeht. Once you have all the cards you need in your hand, you can start doing the Yoi magic stuff and activate Jeht. At this point, you should have tens of dice and you should be able to close out the game. With a deck this OP, surely it has some weaknesses, right? Actually, yes. It does have some weaknesses that you'll need to look out for when playing with or against this deck. When playing Hypermagic, draw power is everything. If you can't find your engine cards by the end of round 2, you're most likely behind in development and your opponent can simply overwhelm you with damage. Number 2. Not having burst ready when you draw Jeht. Sometimes you activate your burst a turn early or draw into Jeht a bit too late. That's just the nature of RNG, so evaluate your board state and determine when it's best to burst. Number 3. Playing against Hypermagic, a good way to stop them from killing you is to out-aggro them. Since they are a combo deck, their setup might take some time, so focus your damage on their carry and hopefully they'll be too low on HP. Remember, these decks have little to no space for healing. A bit more niche of a counter is running a freeze deck. If you can freeze a key unit before or during their combo round, they could lose all value from their combo round and just cripple. Lastly and least likely is if the Hypermagic player misplays a lot. They waste a lot of their dice and fail to kill during their combo round. If that happens, congratulations, they have 0 cards in their deck and they have no more firepower, so take your time and just beat them up. And with that, that's all I have to say about Hypermagic. Also, I can't believe this meme I made about a month ago actually became relevant.